this year we've been thinking about the past 50 years since the Chichester Harbour Conservancy was formed by Act of Parliament in August 1971. So back then, 2 harbour authorities were made into one, but also the responsibilities were expanded to manage the harbour not just as a port authority, but also for nature conservation and the harbour's natural beauty. So the 1960s, development was taking place very quickly in the Chichester Harbour area, and it was 2 things really that put the brakes on that speed of development. Firstly, the AONB designation in 1964, but also the work of Richard Williamson, who did the very first environmental condition survey within Chichester Harbour. Those 2 things helped towards the Chichester Harbour study of 1968, which then led to the creation of the Harbour Conservancy. So during the past 50 years, we've also commemorated 50 years of the AONB designation. That's Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, which was awarded back in 1964. So people live, work and play in Chichester Harbour. There are 10,500 residents within the AONB boundary in 17 harbour communities. And there are many businesses supporting people living here and visiting here. And also people come to enjoy the harbour in all sorts of different ways, such as dog walking, as we have here, enjoying the footpaths, of course all the boating, coming to look at the beautiful views and to watch wildlife.
The usage of the harbour changes year on year, and in the last couple of years especially we've seen a huge increase in the popularity of paddle sports. Canoes and kayaks, paddleboards in particular. I think paddleboard increase has actually gone up by over 250% in the last 2 years, the number we have registered for harbour dues. That has various impacts on the harbour. There potentially is a different techniques for rescue for our patrol to learn. There is a whole new issue of recreational disturbance that we're now seeing, which does affect wildlife. Another change of use that we're seeing within the harbour, and this has been driven especially in the last couple of years with the coronavirus and the increase in the popularity of staycations, is people wanting to holiday on the water. You know, people that don't own a boat, and Airbnb is a prime example. The Conservancy have currently come up with a new houseboat policy whereby certain numbers of vessels within marinas can apply for the status of a houseboat, and they have to comply with various regulations, that sort of thing.
The solar boat is an electrically powered catamaran. I learnt all my electric skills on high voltage ships, and I transferred those skills to the low voltage systems on the solar boat. Since being in this role, we now have an electric outboard for the tender for the solar boat. This is used for the transfer of the skipper and the crew from the jetty to the boat.
So I'm Jeff Riley, I'm the moorings officer for the Conservancy, so I look after all the moorings in the harbour. And I've been asked the question, what do I think things will be looking like in 50 years' time? I think people will still be sailing in the harbour, I think we'll still have boats in the harbour, but I think probably the propulsion systems will be quite different. I don't think we'll have diesel or petrol engines. I think we'll have something that will be much more environmentally friendly. In respect of our moorings, I think we still have moorings within the harbour, but I think they will be completely different to the way they are now. Currently our moorings do some damage to the seabed in certain locations, and I think we'll probably move to something like pontoons, which do much less damage to the environment of the harbour. So I can see those definitely changing, but I think people will still be using the harbour and still be enjoying the harbour in 50 years' time.
So historically and currently, harbour dues paid by every vessel within the harbour are currently done on length. Quite simply, the bigger the vessel, the more you pay, and everyone pays the same price per metre. There is more and more of a discussion happening about how we could encourage less polluting vessels, so vessels primarily that don't use a combustion engine as a form of propulsion, how we could encourage those vessels to propagate within the harbour dues system. If you take the example of some of the Austrian and Swiss lakes, for example, they have areas where combustion engines simply aren't allowed, and they will only have sail-driven vessels, electric vessels, rowing vessels, this sort of thing. End-of-life vessels is something that we are, and harbour authorities across the UK and indeed the world, are becoming more and more concerned with. The vast majority of vessels are made from GRP, glass reinforced plastic, and of course that's exactly what it says on the tin. It is a plastic made up of lots and lots of tiny fibres that while they're all together in a nice new boat and they're in one place, no problem at all. And where we're coming across vessels that we can see deteriorating and not being used, we try and get in touch with the owners, encourage them to deal with the vessel before it becomes ultimately very, very costly to dispose of.
So today we're at the Saltons Way, which is a cycle route between Chichester and West Wittering, which is just over 11 miles. The Conservancy, thanks to a grant from what was then called the Heritage Lottery Fund, were able to open this wonderful cycle route back in, I think it's 2005, 2006. And it's become extremely popular over the last 15 years, to the extent that today, in 2021, we've had to look at resurfacing parts of it. And this project and this section where we're actually standing today, we were able to resurface just over 2,000 metres of the route with this new self-binding gravel to make it look much more like a cycle path, much more fit for purpose, and able to cope with an increasing volume of cycle traffic over the next 20 to 25 years. We've had this growing problem at Dalkey of congestion. At Dalkey itself, we've got Chichester Harbour Education Centre, there's the fishing club, the sailing club, and the pub as well. And it's been something of a hidden gem for us for quite a few years, but that secret is getting out there, which means the popularity is growing, which means many more cars are parking on the road, and it's really getting quite congested there. So next year, we're going to start looking at plans for the potential for a new car park at Dalkey. I don't know where that car park is going to be based. I don't know how many cars it's going to be able to hold, but what we do know is that we have to find a solution.
So it wasn't until 1976 that the Conservancy had its first conservation warden, and this was Joan. She was a resident of Chidham and she was a volunteer. She had campaigned successfully to make Nutbourne Marshes made a nature reserve, and it is from that work that she then agreed to take on the role to look after the wider harbour's conservation matters. So the first projects in the late 1970s, early 80s included extensive tree planting, working with the local farmers on environmental stewardship schemes, and on the water, trialling solar-powered navigation lights. So of course in the early days, the help that we got with our first environmental projects was with teams from the Manpower Services Commission. That was teams of people who didn't have jobs, and also a day release scheme with Ford Open Prison. So these days, help with our environmental projects comes from volunteers. We have many volunteers helping us out in a variety of ways. And today we're on Hayling Island at North Common, and they're doing some scrub clearance. So the main partnerships are with the Friends of Chichester Harbour, which is a charity linked to the Conservancy, the Chichester Harbour Trust, which owns and manages 13 sites, including here at Maybush Copse, and today we've got Maybush Copse Friends on a work party. In the Conservancy's management plan, there are listed 61 local partners and 26 national ones. So in 1996, I joined the Conservancy as Education and Interpretation Warden, and soon after started up the Walks, Talks and Activities programme. Also, I started up school field trips, and it was soon after that I realised I needed shelter and toilets if these were going to work out. And in 1999, was lucky to get the classroom here on the quay at Dalkey.
Well, the Education Centre is open all year. And at the moment, I'm working on the sort of winter programme. The winter programme is quite different from the summer. In the summer, we are very, very busy with lots of schools visiting to learn in the harbour. And the sort of focus there is coasts, animals and habitats and rivers. But in the winter, we change things a little bit, and we tend to work more with local schools. We work on projects like Welly Walks, Harbour School, and we also do something called Junior Conservancy. Junior Conservancy is really a unique workshop, and it involves debating an environmental issue. It's very popular with schools, and we've been running this for many, many years. I think in the future the Education Centre, like all the rest of the Conservancy and everyone, is going to be thinking a lot about the impact of climate change and thinking about how we can explain this to young people. I think obviously there's a lot of anxiety about that, and we're going to think about how we address that and how we can sort of think about how we can help the ecosystems of the harbour and how it's going to impact on the harbour. We're also going to have to think about practical things, because if the sea level does rise, we're in a very watery location, so I think we may need to relocate where we are. And I think we're going to need to be thinking about how we use the harbour and where we take young people, because I think the harbour is going to be busier because of the amount of building that's gone on. There's going to be more people in the harbour, there's going to be more coastal disturbance. So again, more education work we can do there. So I think there will be lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities.
The first managed realignment project was completed in the late 1990s here at Thornham Point. The Conservancy were able to buy it. It was a rubbish dump and they were able to clean it up, and it was turned into a brand new site for the development of salt marsh. Other similar projects were on the west side of Chidham and also recently at Cobner Point. So this year there is a brand new project and it's called Chapron, that's Chichester Harbour Protection and Recovery of Nature, and this will build further on projects for managed realignment like the one here at Thornham Point.
One of the things I'm working on at the moment in Chichester Harbour is the realignment of the Thorney coastline. So the seawall on the west side of Thorney is in poor shape, it's crumbling, and the Environment Agency are planning to breach that seawall and revert some of the land behind that seawall on the west side of Thorney to salt marsh and intertidal mud. So hopefully in 50 years' time or so we'll still be talking about these guys, the Brent geese. Hopefully there'll still be a thriving population visiting here in the winter, and I'm sure we'll still be looking to provide really good habitat for their feeding and roosting. We'll still be talking about the same sorts of issues, the impacts that recreational disturbance has on their populations.
The issues today and in 50 years' time are going to be very, very similar. And the real issue we're struggling with at the moment is the impact of climate change, strange as it may be on a day like this with snow around us. And particularly sea level rise and the impact that's having on the very sensitive habitats in the harbour. Particularly salt marsh, that's very sensitive to the amount of water that covers it. And when you have high defences, as the sea level rise, that kills off certain levels of it and stops it progressing backwards. So the real challenge for us now is to take out sea defences where they're not required, so we can identify areas for future salt marsh, which is so important. It's great for biodiversity, but also it's really important for sequestering carbon and can, in the right conditions, can grow up to 6 millimetres a year, trapping sediment in the system. So that's the real challenge. At the moment we're losing 2.54 hectares a year, but just imagine how much greater that challenge will be in 2070. But I think on the plus side, I think by then humanity will have really got to grips with climate change. It will be a common endeavour to try and really meet that challenge. So I think the challenge will be great, but there will be a full focus, and knowing our ingenuity, I'm sure there'll be lots of creative ways to try and tackle that. And I see in terms of boating, the infrastructure and things like that we'll be quite readily be able to adapt. But the real challenge is to preserve that biodiversity and those habitats of the future.
So it is our wish that the series of 12 vlogs for this year in 2021, when the Conservancy commemorated 50 years since it was formed by Act of Parliament, we hope that this series is kept for people to see and future colleagues in 50 years' time. There are two things especially that we hope will carry on into the future: that people can continue to visit and enjoy this special natural harbour landscape, and that we will all make space to share the shoreline with the variety of wildlife and habitats so they can all thrive and grow too.